This new lens from Viltrox is not only less than 170 grams in weight, it is 40mm. It is a full frame lens for less than $200. It's obviously very cheap and it's quite plasticky. So that means this must be the biggest pile of sh. Viltrox sent me this to review, and I gotta say, a full frame lens at this price point, I was rather intrigued because Sony have a 40mm lens that's also 2.5 and up, and it is nearly 3-4 times the price of this, which, yeah, you're thinking, no. Now, I have been reviewing Viltrox lenses for quite some time, and to be honest, they're some of the best lenses out there with some of the best prices. But this, it just doesn't feel like much. Sorry Viltrox, they did send me this for review, but it just doesn't feel like much. Let's run through the specs here really quickly and let's see, should this lens actually be in your camera bag? And we're going to talk about that in a minute and some of the problems I found with this lens. But specs: 6 to 10 lens elements, focal length as we said is 40mm, the viewing angle is 56.7 degrees, the aperture will run quite quickly from 2.5, so you can get some of that nice blurry compressed background right up to f16. There is 7 aperture blades, the focus mechanism, internal focus, there's an STM and lead screw. Obviously this will go manual focus and autofocus, but there is no switches anywhere to be found. In fact, the only thing that's here actually is a little USB-C port that you can plug in to update firmware and all of that jazz. And then the shooting distance. You have to be about 34 centimeters away from your subject, which is not a lot. And that's it. Now, I have found that 34 centimeters when it came to autofocus for video was debatable, shall we say. Let's start with the negatives of this lens. It's waterproof, which is pretty cool, but there is no kind of weather sealing waterproof gasket here. Not a big deal. Okay, so if you're out shooting in the rain, this thing isn't going to melt, but I wouldn't exactly be submerging it on top of your camera anytime soon. To be honest, there's a couple of gripes that you could probably let slide, but there's one which was a major bone of contention for me. And that is firstly around the focus kind of distance. So you have to be 32 centimeters away from your subject before the focus will work correctly. Now, all that is well and good, but in my experience, especially around video, I was more than 32 centimeters away from my subject and it just wasn't really focusing. You could blame the Sony ZV-E1, which I shot all of these photographs and footage with. Particularly around video, it was tracking everything except just looking at the actual subject I wanted to do. Now, you can blame that in the Sony ZV-E1, but turning off tracking and all of that, I did find the autofocus, not all the time, but from time to time, it just didn't hit the mark of where it would normally should be hitting the mark. And putting on a different lens, Viltrox as well, there was no problem with it. So that's just one small thing. Maybe it's a firmware upgrade. Maybe it's just the version I got. I know my buddy Jason Morris had a really good experience with the autofocus on it. So I'm just putting this down to just a small niggle, but it's just something to be aware of. But definitely the 32 centimeters thing is, I think you got to be a bit further back than that. Autofocus gripes aside, sharpness of this, it's not the sharpest lens, okay? So look, this is $168. You're not going to expect anything spectacularly sharp. Don't get me wrong, it is sharp, but it's not amazingly sharp. It's quite soft around the edges, particularly around kind of f2.5. It's kind of like a lot of lenses. Once it gets to the aperture around the f-stops around 8, then you're kind of getting a uniform picture, but it's not the sharpest lens. Now, some folks might actually like that. Some folks might also like that the bokeh is pretty cool, smooth, creamy, but once you start kind of climbing the aperture numbers up, you can really kind of start seeing more hexagons as opposed to kind of those, the blades essentially, as it were, the 7 blades of this do kind of show up. But some folks like that as well. Either way though, it's very easy to get that bokeh compressed look with this lens. Now, what is and who is this lens for? Number one, the size of this thing means that I was able to fit this into my little Peter McKinnon sling with the Sony ZV-E1, with a 75mm lens, with the 16mm lens, and this just sat on top, nice and toasty and cozy. And I was able to crowbar an Osmo Pocket 3 in there as well, and a mic. and it all fitted in there. So this is absolutely something that you can just throw in your pocket and just have. It's got nice image, okay? It's got a really nice image. It's got that little compressed look because it's 40mm. So for street photography, for portraiture, maybe not a huge lot, but it's just going to work really well depending on what the stuff that you are actually shooting, right? But for B-roll, it's really good. For actual product shots as well, it works really well in those cases. There is no stabilization on this lens, obviously, especially at this price point. So keep in mind that whatever Sony camera that you have, just bear in mind this lens is not stabilized. But then again, a lot of lenses aren't stabilized these days and they work perfectly fine. Either way, though, I found this just a joy to have. I found it really good to have at the price point. Okay, considering the price of the Sony one versus this, I don't see 3-4 times the difference in quality. That autofocus gripe aside, and as I said, was intermittent. I don't see why you'd spend an extra couple of $100 on the actual Sony lens. Sorry, Sony. But Viltrox have made a really good lens here. Yeah, it's got a kind of a weird filter size, 52mm. I'm sure a lot of people will have 67mm filters around the place. I certainly don't have the 52mm lying around anywhere close. I have 67s, 77s, and 82s, which are bog standard, especially around full frame lenses. This is a tiny full frame lens. So again, depending on what you're shooting, that may also be an issue that you're going to have to kind of spark out for. Is that even a word? Either way, you might have to kind of buy a new ND filter for this variable, or otherwise, or a polarizing filter, or anyway, yeah. So that's just something to keep in mind. But for the price point that this is, I mean, you'll know if you need a 40mm lens, right? Because if you're a vlogger, this is not going to be good for vlogging whatsoever. Your whole head is going to be in frame. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, it's not a vlogging lens, but from product photography, for product B-roll, if you're doing a lot of videos where you're actually shooting something else besides yourself, this is really, really, really spectacularly good for the price. That's it. I mean, this is a nice lens. It flares like a lot of cheaper lenses. You'll see a flare here and there, it's the Irish thing tonight. But that's all you got to keep in mind. So know its limitations, which, to be fair, there are not many. It comes in a nice tiny little box, and you get a little bag and all of those nice things. Look, at the end of the day, Viltrox make I don't know how they're making a lens for this price compared to Sony. Again, as I said, repeating myself, I don't see why you would spend 3-4 times the amount on this, on the Sony one. I just don't. But anyway, that's just me. Maybe you're like, no, I want Sony. My Sony aficionado. I want my Sony lenses. But either way, this is the Viltrox 40mm lens. Thanks to Viltrox for sending this. And just for full disclosure, by the way, they haven't said, oh, you got to see this. They just said you want the lens. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take a look. A cheap full frame 40mm lens. Let's be having that. And let you be having this video. And I'll see you on the next one.